Europe in the early medieval period was a world of shadows and uncertainty, a landscape where kingdoms rose and fell with startling speed, and where whispers of power often carried more weight than armies. The fall of the Western Roman Empire had left vast territories fragmented, a patchwork of tribes and fledgling states vying for control, each claiming legitimacy in the absence of centralized authority. It was in this unsettled world that the Merovingians first emerged, a dynasty whose story would be cloaked in both history and legend, their influence reaching far beyond the borders they ruled. The Merovingians are often remembered as the long-haired kings, but this superficial detail belies the profound significance of their reign. Their authority was said to be derived not just from conquest or lineage, but from something deeper, something almost mystical. Ancient chronicles hint at a sacred bloodline, a lineage connected to forces beyond ordinary human understanding. In a time when divine right was the foundation of kingship, the Merovingians were not merely rulers. They were perceived as chosen, their power reinforced by both symbol and story, myth and reality intertwined. This opening chapter of history, though distant and enigmatic, sets the stage for a tale of secrets, intrigue, and hidden knowledge. The dynasty's rise coincided with a period of profound change. Christianity was spreading, old pagan traditions lingered, and the very idea of kingship was evolving. The Merovingians would come to occupy a unique place in this transformation, bridging worlds, influencing societies, and leaving behind a legacy that would echo through centuries. Yet much of their story would be lost, erased, or intentionally obscured, leaving modern historians and seekers of hidden knowledge to piece together the fragments, uncovering a history that is as mysterious as it is compelling. The origins of the Merovingians are shrouded in the mists of early medieval Europe, a time when the Roman Empire had crumbled and the continent was a patchwork of warring tribes, fledgling kingdoms, and fragmented cultures. Amidst this chaos, a dynasty emerged that would come to shape the destiny of what would become France. Known as the Merovingians, these kings were said to descend from a line of warriors and leaders whose influence stretched far beyond the battlefields of their time. Their story begins in the 5th century, a period defined by uncertainty, conquest, and the tenuous fusion of Roman legacies with Germanic traditions. Clovis I, the most celebrated of the Merovingian kings, stands at the heart of their early ascendancy. Born into a world in flux, he inherited the leadership of the Salian Franks, a Germanic tribe whose roots ran deep along the Lower Rhine. From an early age, Clovis displayed a combination of cunning and martial skill that set him apart from rival chieftains. His rise to power was neither straightforward nor uncontested. It was marked by strategic alliances, decisive battles, and a calculated grasp of both fear and loyalty among his followers. But what truly distinguished Clovis and the Merovingians was the aura that surrounded their very presence, a sense that their rule was not merely political, but somehow sacred, ordained by a higher force. Legend suggests that the Merovingians traced their lineage back to mythical figures, hinting at divine origins that blurred the line between history and myth. One such tale spoke of a mysterious sea creature, a Merovingian being of both mortal and supernatural descent, whose bloodline would carry extraordinary power. Whether myth or reality, these stories infused the dynasty with a sense of destiny, a perception that they were more than mere rulers, that they held secrets of the land and its people, secrets powerful enough to command allegiance and fear in equal measure. The rise of the Merovingians cannot be understood without considering the fractured landscape they sought to unify. The remnants of Roman influence lingered in laws, language, and infrastructure, yet the once mighty empire was a shadow of itself. Into this vacuum stepped the Merovingians, consolidating power not only through conquest, but through shrewd diplomacy. Clovis' conversion to Christianity, a moment celebrated in both religious and secular chronicles, was a calculated decision that aligned him with the growing influence of the church, granting him legitimacy and a spiritual authority that extended far beyond the battlefield. It was this fusion of temporal and divine power that allowed the Merovingians to solidify their rule and command respect among both warriors and clergy alike. But their ascent was not without controversy or challenge. The Merovingians ruled a tapestry of peoples, each with its own customs, allegiances, and rivalries. The process of unification required more than force. It demanded an understanding of local traditions, the subtle manipulation of loyalties, and the careful balance of fear and favor. Clovis' victories against rival tribes were as much about psychological strategy as they were about military might. He understood the power of perception, cultivating an image that elevated him above ordinary kings, as though he were a living embodiment of the divine will. Even as they consolidated power, the Merovingians became subjects of whispered speculation and veiled suspicion. Their long hair, a symbol of their sacred kingship, was said to carry mystical significance, marking them as chosen and setting them apart from their subjects. To touch a king's hair was forbidden, and to cut it without consent was considered an act of sacrilege. This combination of visible distinction and secretive aura reinforced the perception that the Merovingians were not merely rulers of men, but custodians of a deeper, almost arcane authority. As the dynasty established itself, it also became a repository of stories, rituals, and perhaps even knowledge that few outsiders could comprehend. Tales of hidden treasures, sacred relics, and forbidden wisdom began to circulate, cloaked in allegory and legend, whispered in the halls of monasteries and the dark corners of forests. The Merovingians' influence extended beyond the political sphere. It reached into the cultural and spiritual fabric of early medieval Europe. They were architects of not just kingdoms, but of a narrative that would ripple through centuries, inspiring myths, provoking fear, and planting seeds of intrigue that survive to this day. Yet, while the Merovingians rose to prominence with seemingly unstoppable momentum, the shadows that followed them were equally potent. Rival dynasties, ambitious nobles, and the ever-expanding power of the church would all play roles in shaping and eventually suppressing their legacy. Even in this early period, the tension between visible rule and hidden influence, between open conquest and secret knowledge, began to define their story. It is this delicate balance between what is recorded and what is whispered, between history and legend, that forms the foundation of the Merovingian saga, a story whose echoes can still be felt in the landscapes, relics, and mysteries of France today. By the end of the 5th century, the Merovingians had secured a place in the annals of European history, but their greatest legacy remained concealed, woven into the fabric of myth, secrecy, and bloodlines that would captivate imaginations for generations. The dynasty had begun its journey not just as rulers, but as guardians of something far more enigmatic, a legacy that history would attempt to erase, but that rumor, legend, and the faint traces of memory would ensure was never truly forgotten. The Merovingians were kings unlike any Europe had seen before. Their long hair, flowing and uncut, became a symbol as much as a crown, a visible marker of power that set them apart from ordinary rulers. It was said that their strength and authority flowed directly from these locks, that the longer the hair, the greater the connection to divine or mystical forces. In a world still heavily influenced by superstition and sacred symbolism, appearances were not merely decorative. They were declarations of power, and the Merovingians wore theirs with an almost ritualistic significance. This emphasis on hair as a symbol of authority was not merely a matter of tradition, but a codified emblem of sacred kingship. In the eyes of their subjects, the king's hair was a tangible sign of divine favor. To cut it without permission was an act of desecration, punishable by death in some accounts. It was said that the long-haired kings carried the weight of their ancestors' wisdom and the destiny of their people within each strand. Their hair distinguished them from the common rulers of neighboring kingdoms, whose authority was often measured in swords and fortresses rather than in subtle, sacred symbolism. The long hair of the Merovingians became inseparable from the mystique of their bloodline. Rumors whispered across villages and monasteries suggested that these kings were not simply political figures, but custodians of a power older than the lands they ruled. Some chroniclers hinted that their very blood carried a hidden energy, a force that could heal, protect, or, in the wrong hands, be used to manipulate fate itself. Such stories may seem fantastical now, but in a time when myth and reality were intertwined, they served to elevate the Merovingians above mere mortals, casting them as figures both revered and feared. Their separation from ordinary men extended beyond appearances. The Merovingians were known to surround themselves with secrecy, conducting rituals and ceremonies that few outsiders could witness. Every gesture, every public appearance, was calculated to reinforce their image as chosen rulers. The long hair was both a literal and figurative crown, a symbol that their strength was inseparable from their sacred identity. Some historians have suggested that this ceremonial aspect was not simply a matter of vanity, but a form of social control, a way to instill awe and maintain order among subjects who believed their king was touched by the divine. Yet this aura of mysticism carried risks. The Merovingians' distinct appearance and the legends that followed them drew attention and envy. Rivals, both within and outside the kingdom, viewed their uniqueness as a threat. The Carolingians, who would eventually displace them, recognized that to control Europe meant not only defeating armies, but also dismantling the symbols of divine authority that the Merovingians wielded. It is no coincidence that one of the first steps in the Carolingian rise was the deposition and symbolic trimming of the Merovingian kings, a literal and figurative act intended to sever the sacred power thought to reside in their hair. The long hair was more than a political symbol. It was deeply tied to the Merovingians' spiritual identity. Some legends suggest that these kings could sense danger, foresee events, or even commune with forces unseen, though these claims are difficult to verify. Whether truth, exaggeration, or carefully cultivated rumor, the perception of such abilities reinforced their status and mystique. In medieval Europe, where superstition and divine right shaped politics as much as armies did, such qualities were immensely potent. A king believed to be chosen by higher forces commanded loyalty that extended far beyond fear or obligation. This sacred aspect of the Merovingians is essential to understanding why their legacy was so fiercely contested. Their influence was not purely temporal. It carried spiritual implications. To control or eliminate a Merovingian king was to disrupt a power perceived as cosmic in scale. Rival dynasties and the church recognized that their authority could not merely be suppressed through politics alone. It had to be undermined symbolically, spiritually, and psychologically. This understanding helped explain the extraordinary measures taken against them, from forced abdications to the erasure of their genealogical records. Even within their own courts, the Merovingians maintained strict rituals that reinforced the sanctity of their lineage. Advisors, warriors, and scribes operated within a hierarchy that mirrored the sacred order they embodied. Every action, from public appearances to private ceremonies, was designed to preserve the impression that these kings were vessels of a divine mandate. Their hair, their gestures, their very presence, all became a theater of power, a living reminder that the Merovingians were no ordinary rulers. The fascination with their long hair endures because it symbolizes something deeper than vanity or tradition. It represents a connection to mystery, to a hidden knowledge intertwined with lineage and blood. It suggests that the Merovingians understood the subtle interplay between perception, symbolism, and power in a way that transcended ordinary politics. Their hair was an emblem, a signpost to the hidden truths that history would later attempt to suppress. In exploring the Merovingians, we are confronted with a dynasty that was as enigmatic as it was powerful. The long hair was more than a style. It was a declaration of identity, a sign of sacred authority, and a reminder that in the early medieval world, power was measured not only by armies or land, but by perception, legend, and the aura of the unseen. It is within these strands, entwined with myth, blood, and secrecy, that the story of the Merovingians begins to reveal its first tantalizing mysteries. Mysteries that would echo through centuries and leave a trace that even time and history could not fully erase. The Merovingian dynasty was as much defined by its blood as by its power. To understand them fully, one must look beyond battles, crowns, and ceremonies, and into the tangled threads of genealogy, legend, and lineage that wove together to form their identity. Their bloodlines were not merely matters of family tree. They were considered sacred, a living connection to forces that transcended ordinary human experience. It was a concept that set the Merovingians apart from other European dynasties and inspired both reverence and fear among those who recognized the implications of such a claim. The origins of the Merovingian bloodline are enveloped in legend. Some chroniclers suggest descent from mythical heroes and, in certain accounts, even from biblical figures. These claims were never fully verified, yet they persist in historical whispers, hinting that the Merovingians carried a lineage so extraordinary that it could not be acknowledged openly. In a Europe steeped in religion and superstition, such a lineage was a potent symbol. It suggested a connection to divine purpose, a mandate that went beyond conquest or inheritance. Their blood was thought to contain a hidden power, a unique essence that marked them as chosen. Clovis I, the most famous of the early Merovingian kings, was often portrayed not simply as a warrior or ruler, but as a figure whose very life was guided by destiny. His victories over rival tribes were seen not only as political triumphs, but as affirmations of a lineage favored by the divine. The careful marriages arranged by the Merovingians further reinforced this sacred genealogical network, binding them to other noble families across Europe, while maintaining a sense of exclusivity and mystique around their own bloodline. Every alliance, every child born into the family, was both a political and spiritual event, a reinforcement of the dynasty's perceived divine mandate. But what made the Merovingian bloodline truly intriguing was the suggestion that it carried knowledge and power as well as heritage. Certain medieval texts and later speculative works hint that their lineage was tied to the Holy Grail, not as a cup of legend, but as a symbol of a bloodline imbued with sacred purpose. The Grail, in this sense, becomes less a physical object and more a metaphorical vessel, a representation of the secrets and sanctity held within the Merovingian veins. Whether one views this as literal truth or allegorical legend, it is clear that contemporaries treated the dynasty with a mixture of awe and suspicion, as though they were in possession of a force too potent to be trusted entirely. The very structure of Merovingian rule reflects this understanding of blood as power. Kings were often chosen or revered not only for their skill or leadership, but for their lineage. This made succession a matter of profound significance, and disputes over inheritance were not merely political, but moral and spiritual crises, with implications for the perceived balance of divine order. Chroniclers describe moments of conflict in which the legitimacy of rulers was questioned not on the basis of policy or strength, but on the purity and sanctity of their blood. To be a Merovingian was to carry a responsibility that extended beyond the temporal realm, into the unseen, mysterious currents of fate and divine favor. Rival dynasties quickly recognized that the Merovingians' appeal was rooted as much in their sacred bloodline as in their armies. The Carolingians, rising in power and influence, understood that to challenge the Merovingians was not simply a matter of conquest. It required undermining the very aura of sacred authority that had been cultivated over generations. This may help explain the seemingly ritualistic manner in which Merovingian kings were dethroned, exiled, or symbolically stripped of their sacred attributes. It was not enough to remove them from power. Their bloodline itself had to be marginalized, obscured, and, in the historical record, nearly erased. Yet, despite the efforts of rivals and chroniclers, traces of the Merovingian bloodline endured, leaving subtle, enigmatic clues for those who followed. Genealogical records, obscure chronicles, and even religious documents occasionally hint at hidden connections. Families that carried the Merovingian legacy quietly through centuries, often under different names, often in the shadows of European nobility. These threads, while tantalizingly incomplete, suggest a deliberate effort to preserve the lineage and its secrets, even as public power was stripped away. The Merovingians' sacred bloodline was also reflected in cultural practices and symbolic gestures. Rituals of succession, ceremonial gestures, and even physical markings were designed to reinforce the sanctity of the king and his lineage. Their long hair, previously discussed, was a visual manifestation of this sacred inheritance, a constant reminder that the king's strength derived not merely from political power, but from something older, deeper, and almost ineffable. Coins, artwork, and monumental inscriptions often carried coded references to this bloodline, as though the dynasty was leaving a subtle signature upon the world, proof of existence for those attuned to the hidden language of symbols. It is in this combination of heritage, ritual, and secrecy that the Merovingians' enduring mystique lies. Their bloodline was not just a biological fact. It was a living narrative, a story told in whispers, symbols, and clandestine records. It held the potential for power, spiritual insight, and legitimacy in a world that was both deeply religious and deeply suspicious of authority that could not be easily quantified. This is why the dynasty inspired such fascination, both in its own time and in the centuries that followed. The Merovingians were a dynasty whose power was inseparable from their identity, whose identity was inseparable from their blood, and whose blood, whether literal or symbolic, became the vessel of mystery that continues to capture imaginations today. By exploring the Merovingians in this light, one begins to understand why their story is so compelling. It is not merely a tale of kings and battles, but of lineage, secrecy, and the potential for hidden power that stretches across generations. The bloodline is the axis upon which the dynasty's mystique turns, a force that shaped their rise, dictated their downfall, and left echoes that would resonate long after their names have been removed from the pages of conventional history. To trace the Merovingian lineage is to follow a thread of mystery that intertwines with the spiritual and political currents of Europe, a journey that reveals not only the past, but the hidden dimensions of influence and power that history often conceals. The idea that the Merovingians were guardians of a hidden secret stretches beyond the realm of genealogy and legend into something far more elusive, the connection to the Holy Grail. Yet, the Grail here is not the familiar chalice of medieval romance or the cup of Christ's Last Supper, but rather a symbol, perhaps even a literal secret, woven into the very fabric of the Merovingian bloodline. It is a secret whispered in cryptic texts, hinted at in obscure chronicles, and suggested by the rituals, symbols, and actions of a dynasty that was always more than it appeared. To contemplate this connection is to enter a world where history and mythology blur, where the lines between fact and allegory are deliberately obscured, and where the Grail may represent a lineage, a knowledge, or a divine inheritance hidden from prying eyes. The first clues of this connection emerge in the mythic narratives of medieval Europe. Stories of knights seeking the Grail often describe a journey not simply across landscapes, but through layers of moral, spiritual, and esoteric understanding. Some scholars and modern researchers suggest that these stories encode a memory of the Merovingians' sacred bloodline, transformed into allegorical quests that could be preserved safely through legend. In this reading, the Grail itself becomes a cipher, a symbol of power, wisdom, and divine favor inherited through the Merovingian veins. Those who could interpret the allegories were thought to be initiated into knowledge that the wider world was forbidden to see. It is not difficult to see why such a secret would have been both alluring and dangerous. The idea that the Merovingians carried a sacred lineage connected to the Grail would have placed them outside the ordinary structures of medieval authority. Their influence was not only political, it was spiritual, mystical, and potentially subversive to the ambitions of the church and rival dynasties. The very suggestion that a royal family possessed something so extraordinary that it could shape destiny, yet remain hidden, created a tension that would echo through centuries. Myths, allegories, and coded messages became the tools of preservation, allowing fragments of this knowledge to survive even as overt Merovingian power was systematically erased. Numerous theories suggest that the Grail and the Merovingians were intertwined through marriage alliances, sacred rituals, and secret codes hidden in plain sight. Some medieval manuscripts hint at a connection between the bloodline and sacred relics, objects of power that were carefully guarded or concealed. Even coins, seals, and church carvings have been interpreted as subtle markers, clues left for those with the eyes and knowledge to recognize them. The idea that these kings were more than rulers, that they were custodians of a living secret, is woven into the very material culture of the period, though such traces are often overlooked or dismissed as folklore. This theory also offers insight into the secrecy and mystique surrounding the Merovingians' daily lives. Their long hair, ceremonial practices, and restricted court rituals may have functioned as part of a broader system of encoding and safeguarding knowledge. Just as symbols could be hidden in art and architecture, the bloodline itself may have been a vessel for preserving wisdom, spiritual power, or a claim to divine favor. In this sense, the Grail connection becomes a metaphor for the transmission of an ancient secret, a living heritage maintained through generations and safeguarded against those who would exploit or suppress it. One of the most fascinating aspects of this connection is the persistence of the Grail motif across centuries, often in seemingly unrelated contexts. The tales of King Arthur and his knights, written down in monasteries hundreds of years later, may contain echoes of Merovingian influence. Scholars have noted striking parallels between Grail legends and the history of the dynasty, from references to sacred blood to journeys that mirror the political and spiritual struggles of the kings themselves. If these parallels are more than coincidence, they suggest a deliberate effort to encode the dynasty's secrets into stories that could survive even when their political power did not. The Grail, as a symbol of the Merovingian secret, was never meant to be fully revealed. Its power lay in its obscurity, in the knowledge that it existed and yet remained hidden. Those initiated into the tradition, whether scribes, nobles, or mystics, understood that the secret was more than symbolic. It was practical, political, and spiritual. To reveal it prematurely would have threatened not only the dynasty, but the delicate balance of influence in medieval Europe. This is why much of the evidence is fragmentary, cryptic, or encoded. The Merovingians understood the importance of safeguarding what was most potent in their lineage. It is tempting to imagine the Grail as a tangible object, a relic passed from hand to hand in secret ceremonies, yet the evidence suggests that its true essence was always more abstract, more elusive. It may have been a knowledge of one's ancestry, a sacred ritual preserved within the court, or even the understanding of a mystical truth encoded in symbols and gestures. Whatever form it took, It transformed the Merovingians into more than kings. It made them custodians of something eternal, something that could not be conquered through force alone. This understanding of the Grail and the Merovingians forces a reconsideration of medieval history itself. It suggests that beneath the surface of battles, coronations, and treaties, there existed a hidden dimension where knowledge, bloodlines, and sacred symbolism dictated outcomes in ways often invisible to ordinary chroniclers. The Merovingians were not merely players in political games. They were carriers of an esoteric legacy, a thread of continuity linking the past to a deeper, perhaps forgotten, wisdom. And so, the legend persists. The Grail, whether literal, symbolic, or allegorical, remains intertwined with the story of the Merovingians. It is a secret that continues to tantalize historians, mystics, and storytellers alike. Even today, the echoes of that hidden power resonate in the myths, architecture, and obscure references scattered across Europe, hinting at a legacy too profound to be fully erased. In contemplating this connection, one begins to see the Merovingians not just as kings of a long-past era, but as keepers of a secret that challenges our understanding of history, lineage, and the very nature of power. The Merovingians' sacred bloodline and the secrets it carried inevitably drew the attention, and eventually the suspicion, of the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, the Church. While the dynasty had initially aligned itself with Christian authorities, most famously through Clovis I's conversion, their independence, mystique, and potential possession of knowledge deemed dangerous made them both allies and adversaries in a delicate balance of power. What the kings possessed in sacred lineage, the Church feared in potential challenge. For any family claiming divine favor beyond its sanction represented a threat to ecclesiastical control. The tension between temporal power and spiritual authority became increasingly pronounced, laying the groundwork for the deliberate suppression of Merovingian influence. The deposition of Merovingian kings was often accompanied by symbolic acts designed to strip them of their sacred authority. The most conspicuous was the ceremonial cutting of their long hair, an act laden with significance. To the untrained eye, it may have seemed merely a physical alteration, a rite marking the end of a king's rule, yet it was far more than that. The hair was a visible emblem of divine favor, a tangible sign of a king's sacred bloodline and mystical potency. By removing it, the Church and the Carolingian successors aimed to sever both spiritual and symbolic power, turning kings into mere men. These acts were part of a broader campaign to neutralize the Merovingians, to erase not only their political authority, but also the aura of sacred legitimacy that had long set them apart. The Carolingians, who would rise to dominate the Frankish realms, were adept in this subtle warfare. Their ascent was not only militaristic, but psychological and symbolic. Pepin the Short, and later Charlemagne, strategically distanced themselves from Merovingian claims, positioning themselves as divinely sanctioned rulers while simultaneously undermining the mystical legitimacy of their predecessors. By controlling the narrative, they ensured that history remembered the Merovingians not as powerful custodians of secret knowledge, but as a dynasty whose influence waned, whose legacy was fragmented. The erasure was gradual, methodical, and highly effective, leaving tantalizing gaps in the historical record that continue to fuel speculation to this day. The suppression extended beyond ceremonies and chronicles. Religious institutions, including monasteries and scriptoriums, became instruments in the selective preservation or destruction of knowledge. Texts that hinted at the sacred bloodline, the Grail connection, or even unusual rituals associated with the Merovingians were carefully controlled, often rewritten or entirely lost. Some manuscripts were hidden away, while others were destroyed under the pretext of orthodoxy. What survived was often cloaked in allegory, obfuscated so that only a select few could interpret its meaning. These measures were not mere acts of censorship. They were strategies of control, ensuring that any perception of unmediated sacred authority remained under the Church's guidance. Yet even as they sought to suppress the Merovingians, the Church inadvertently preserved fragments of their secret. The very act of erasure left gaps, anomalies, and inconsistencies in historical accounts, creating a shadow history that attentive scholars and later theorists could piece together. Monastic chroniclers, whether intentionally or not, recorded events in ways that left subtle clues. The odd emphasis on hair, the peculiar treatment of certain kings, the cryptic references to sacred relics and rituals, all these survive as breadcrumbs leading to the elusive truth. The suppression, while effective in controlling public perception, could not entirely erase the legacy of a dynasty so deeply intertwined with sacred symbolism and esoteric knowledge. The political and spiritual tensions were mirrored in the daily lives of the Merovingians themselves. Their courts became spaces of secrecy, guarded rituals, and coded communication. Advisors, scribes, and clergy loyal to the dynasty worked to preserve the sacred heritage of the kings, often at great personal risk. It is within these hidden networks that some of the most intriguing aspects of Merovingian history emerge. Suggestions that knowledge, rituals, and perhaps even the Grail secret itself were safeguarded away from prying eyes, passed quietly through trusted hands, ensuring that the dynasty's influence could endure even when official power was stripped away. The Church's suppression was not limited to symbols or texts. It also extended to memory itself. Over generations, Merovingian kings were reframed in historical narratives as weak, ineffectual, or overshadowed by their Carolingian successors. Their achievements were downplayed, their mystique trivialized, and the grandeur of their sacred lineage muted. Even the names of powerful kings faded into obscurity, replaced by a sanitized version of history that aligned with the Church's vision of divine order. The erasure was so comprehensive that for centuries, the Merovingians existed largely as footnotes, their true significance hidden beneath layers of allegory, legend, and selective documentation. Yet, the very act of suppression suggests a recognition of something extraordinary. The Church and its allies would not have expended such effort if the Merovingians were ordinary rulers. The combination of sacred bloodline, mystical symbols, and the potential Grail connection made them both feared and fascinating. The suppression speaks to the enduring power of the dynasty's secrets, a power that could not be fully destroyed, only hidden, reinterpreted, and encoded into allegory and myth. In this way, the Merovingians' legacy survived not through monuments, titles, or public records, but through the shadows, the whispers, and the fragments of knowledge that persevered despite centuries of systematic erasure. The suppression of the Merovingians also set the stage for centuries of speculation and fascination. For historians, mystics, and conspirators alike, the gaps in the record, the symbolic rituals, and the cryptic texts serve as evidence of a hidden truth waiting to be rediscovered. It is within these shadows that modern fascination with the dynasty arises, a fascination not with kings who conquered lands, but with kings who wielded a secret power so potent that the most powerful institutions in Europe sought to erase them from memory entirely. The tension between what is known and what is hidden, between recorded history and whispering legend, is the defining characteristic of the Merovingian story. To trace the Merovingians is to trace a dynasty under siege, not only by armies, but by history itself. Their deposition, the ritual cutting of hair, the rewriting of chronicles, and the concealment of sacred knowledge were part of a campaign to control the narrative of power and divine legitimacy. Yet, paradoxically, this very effort ensured that their story would endure as a mystery. The suppressed becomes more alluring precisely because it is forbidden, and the Merovingians, stripped of temporal authority yet cloaked in secrecy, continue to captivate our imagination centuries later. Their story is not one of mere defeat, but of endurance, a narrative preserved in whispers, relics, and shadows, awaiting those who dare to seek the truth hidden behind the veil of history. The Merovingians left behind more than chronicles and fleeting legends. They also embedded their secrets in the very fabric of the world they shaped. Symbols, coins, architecture, and artifacts were not merely decorative or utilitarian. They were a coded language, a hidden system of signs meant to preserve knowledge across generations. Sacred geometry, cryptic numerology, and symbolic motifs appear throughout Merovingian history, as though the dynasty were communicating in a language only the initiated could understand. Each element, from a church's floor plan to the subtle imagery carved on a seal, seems deliberate, a deliberate whisper from the past hinting at truths too potent to speak aloud. Coins minted under Merovingian rule provide a fascinating example. To the untrained eye, they depict kings, saints, or standard symbols of rulership, but to those attuned to esoteric interpretation, these images are far more than propaganda. Some coins are marked with unusual crosses, geometrical patterns, or stylized animals whose placement suggests deeper significance. Scholars and enthusiasts have argued that these subtle cues may encode dynastic lineage, divine favor, or even hints about sacred relics under the dynasty's protection. In this sense, the coins were more than currency. They were messages, portable and enduring, capable of traveling far beyond the kingdom while preserving secrets in plain sight. Architecture, too, was a canvas for the Merovingians' coded knowledge. Churches, monasteries, and royal halls often incorporated proportions, angles, and alignments that modern researchers interpret as deliberate exercises in sacred geometry. The design of a building, the orientation of its walls towards celestial bodies, and a repetition of specific geometric patterns may have been intended to reflect cosmic order, to embed spiritual truths, or to act as a visual signature of the dynasty's sacred bloodline. It is easy to dismiss these patterns as coincidence or stylistic choices, yet when considered alongside other Merovingian symbols, a more deliberate, almost mystical intention begins to emerge. Relics and ceremonial objects were no less symbolic. Chalices, swords, and crowns often carried intricate engravings or hidden markings, subtle signs indicating their association with the Merovingians' sacred legacy. The objects themselves may have functioned as mnemonic devices, storing knowledge in physical form, preserving ritual significance, or marking points of spiritual power. Even the placement of relics within churches, crypts, or burial chambers may have been deliberate, creating alignments and symbolic pathways that only the initiated could interpret. It is a reminder that the Merovingians viewed their world not merely as a collection of structures and objects, but as a living network of encoded knowledge. The symbolic language of the Merovingians extended into the written word as well. Chronicles, letters, and religious texts often contain subtle deviations from standard narrative, unusual phrasing, or cryptic references that hint at concealed meanings. Certain medieval scholars have suggested that these texts functioned as a kind of cipher, preserving knowledge of the dynasty's bloodline, rituals, or sacred associations while appearing entirely conventional to the casual reader. Monastic scribes, who both revered and feared the Merovingians' power, may have contributed to this subtle encoding, balancing fidelity to the written record with the need to obscure potent truths from those deemed unworthy or dangerous. Numerology is another thread woven into the Merovingians' symbolic web. Recurrent numbers, dates, and measurements appear throughout their artifacts and constructions. Some argue that these were not arbitrary, but reflected a sophisticated understanding of patterns believed to correspond with divine order or cosmic influence. Certain numbers may have marked sacred events, aligned with celestial cycles, or encoded genealogical information, preserving the dynasty's secrets for those who knew how to interpret the code. Even today, the recurrence of these patterns in historical sites and objects invites speculation about the depth of the Merovingians' esoteric knowledge. This network of symbols and sacred geometry suggests that the Merovingians conceived of power as something that extended far beyond military conquest or political control. Authority, in their worldview, was intertwined with knowledge, spiritual insight, and hidden wisdom. The visible world, the palaces, coins, and manuscripts, served as a layer, but beneath it lay a more profound realm of meaning, accessible only to those with eyes to see and minds prepared to interpret. This approach blurred the boundary between ruler and mystic, between king and custodian of ancient secrets, creating a dynasty whose influence could persist even in the shadows. The enduring fascination with Merovingian symbols is evidence of their lasting power. Across centuries, scholars, historians, and mystics have attempted to decode these patterns, often arriving at conflicting interpretations. Some see evidence of sacred bloodlines, Grail connections, or lost wisdom. Others caution against overinterpretation, warning that humans naturally find patterns where none were intended. Yet the very act of creating such symbols suggests deliberate intent, an understanding that visible structures and objects could preserve knowledge in ways that outlasted written records or fleeting political power. Even geographic features may have played a role in this coded system. Certain Merovingian sites, such as burial mounds, ritual spaces, and early churches, appear to align with astronomical events or specific landscapes, suggesting a cosmological consciousness embedded in their planning. These alignments could indicate ritual calendars, spiritual significance, or encoded guidance for future generations seeking the dynasty's hidden truths. In this sense, the Merovingians were not merely rulers of men, but architects of an esoteric world, one that could only be fully appreciated by those attuned to their symbolic language. The interplay of coins, architecture, texts, numerology, and geography forms a web of encoded meaning that persists as one of the most enigmatic aspects of Merovingian history. It paints a portrait of a dynasty acutely aware of its vulnerability and its power, a dynasty that understood that knowledge could endure long after political authority had faded. Each symbol, each alignment, each carefully placed artifact becomes a key to a puzzle that spans centuries, challenging modern investigators to decipher intentions that were deliberately concealed, yet tantalizingly accessible to those willing to look closely. In contemplating these symbols, one begins to appreciate the Merovingians not only as rulers, but as custodians of hidden knowledge. Their legacy was not merely a series of kings and battles, but a carefully constructed system of signs and alignments, a language in which bloodline, power, and divine mandate were intertwined. The dynasty's secrets, embedded in objects, spaces, and texts, hint at an understanding of the world that was as spiritual as it was political, as mystical as it was practical. To follow these signs is to follow the faint traces of a civilization that sought to preserve its most potent truths in plain sight, whispering across centuries to those daring enough to listen. The Merovingians were not merely kings who ruled by sword and ceremony. They were custodians of knowledge that was deliberately concealed, preserved in texts and chronicles often hidden from public view. Many of these writings were lost, destroyed, or deliberately obscured over the centuries, leaving tantalizing glimpses into a legacy that was considered too potent for common understanding. Monasteries, scriptoria, and secret libraries became the guardians of this knowledge, places where scribes and clerics recorded histories and allegories in ways that concealed as much as they revealed. These lost texts, often referenced only indirectly in surviving manuscripts, form one of the most compelling threads in the story of the Merovingians, hinting at truths that the powers of the medieval world sought to suppress. Some of the earliest records concerning the Merovingians were religious chronicles, written by monks who were both fascinated and wary of the dynasty. These texts describe kings whose authority was more than political, whose lineage and blood were sacred, and whose actions were guided by forces beyond ordinary perception. Yet, even in these accounts, details are often cryptic, obscured by allegorical language, and intertwined with legend. It is as though the scribes themselves understood that the knowledge they recorded needed to survive, but only for those equipped to interpret it, those able to navigate the delicate balance between revelation and concealment. Beyond monasteries, there are references to private libraries within Merovingian courts, where texts concerning sacred rituals, lineage, and esoteric knowledge were stored. These manuscripts may have contained genealogical charts, maps, or symbolic diagrams illustrating hidden truths of the bloodline and its connection to relics such as the Grail. While the physical evidence of these texts has largely vanished, the echoes of their existence survive in scattered citations, later chronicles, and allegorical literature. Every lost manuscript represents not only a historical gap, but also a deliberate act of secrecy, a method by which the dynasty protected its most sacred knowledge from those who might misuse it. Some scholars speculate that the Merovingians possessed not only genealogical and religious texts, but also philosophical treatises, esoteric instructions, and coded wisdom that bridged the material and spiritual worlds. These works may have explained the significance of sacred geometry, the symbolism embedded in rituals, or the mystical properties of relics under the dynasty's guardianship. In essence, the Merovingians could have had access to a body of knowledge that allowed them to navigate both earthly power and metaphysical understanding, a dangerous combination that medieval authorities, including the church and rival dynasties, would have had every incentive to suppress. The act of suppression often took extreme forms. Some texts were destroyed outright, burned as heretical or suspicious, while others were deliberately rewritten to obscure meaning or recast events in a more orthodox narrative. Even the surviving chronicles, when examined closely, reveal a pattern of omissions and ambiguities that suggest selective recording. Historians have noted that many events critical to understanding the Merovingian sacred authority are either heavily summarized, shrouded in allegory, or completely absent from surviving accounts. These gaps are not accidental. They're the fingerprints of a deliberate campaign to control the historical narrative while leaving enough breadcrumbs for those who were capable of interpretation. The loss of these texts has fueled centuries of speculation. Mystics, historians, and conspiracy theorists have long searched for evidence of the Merovingians' hidden knowledge, interpreting allegorical references, unusual genealogical notations, and cryptic allusions in surviving documents as hints of what once existed. Some of these lost chronicles are said to have contained instructions for safeguarding sacred relics, methods for maintaining dynastic secrecy, and even encoded insights into spiritual or cosmic laws. In essence, they may have served as manuals for sustaining a civilization within the shadows, a guidebook for those chosen to preserve the bloodline's secrets across generations. One of the most intriguing aspects of these lost texts is their alleged link to the Grail and other sacred relics. While surviving accounts often treat these objects as allegorical or symbolic, the vanished manuscripts may have detailed their significance in practical terms, explaining rituals, lineages, and powers associated with their possession. These texts, if they existed as described, would have been of profound interest to anyone seeking to understand the hidden structures of authority, power, and spiritual knowledge in medieval Europe. The very act of their disappearance, deliberate or otherwise, has only intensified the aura of mystery surrounding the Merovingians. The process of encoding information within texts was also a sophisticated art. Marginal notes, unusual phrasing, and allegorical storytelling may have served as protective measures, allowing information to survive while remaining incomprehensible to casual readers. For example, A seemingly mundane chronicle of a king's reign could contain hidden genealogical clues, symbolic references to sacred events, or instructions for ritual practice, all masked beneath layers of conventional historical narrative. This duality, text as history, text as code, underscores the intelligence and foresight of the Merovingians in preserving knowledge, even in the face of political and ecclesiastical pressures. Even today, fragments of these lost texts occasionally resurface in obscure archives, private collections, or references within later manuscripts. Each discovery sparks fascination and debate as researchers attempt to reconstruct not only the historical events, but also the esoteric meaning contained within the original works. The hunt for these lost chronicles becomes more than academic. It is a quest to touch the hidden heart of a dynasty whose secrets, though suppressed, still resonate across time. In contemplating the lost texts of the Merovingians, one begins to grasp the complexity of their legacy. Their power was not solely political, nor was it only spiritual. It was embedded in knowledge that transcended the ordinary, preserved through subtle means, and protected against those who might exploit or destroy it. These texts remind us that history is often incomplete not by accident, but by design, shaped as much by concealment as by revelation. The Merovingians understood this principle, and it is this understanding that continues to cast a shadow over their story, inviting generations to explore, interpret, and imagine the truths that remain hidden. Ultimately, the vanished chronicles and forbidden manuscripts represent more than lost history. They're a testament to the enduring allure of the Merovingians. Their story survives not only in battles, kings, and coins, but in the whispers of what was once written and carefully hidden. The loss itself becomes part of the mystery, a deliberate void that challenges historians and dreamers alike to look beyond conventional records, to question the narratives handed down, and to seek the faint traces of knowledge preserved in secrecy. The Merovingians, through their lost texts, remind us that the past is not only what is recorded, but also what is concealed, and that the most powerful legacies often exist in the spaces between history and myth. The Merovingians were more than mere rulers of the Frankish kingdoms. Beneath the veneer of kingship, they carried a legacy shrouded in ritual, symbolism, and mysteries that have long eluded mainstream historians. Their long hair, often remarked upon by chroniclers, was said to symbolize their sacred power, a visible sign of a mystical authority that linked them directly to divine or cosmic forces. But hair was only the surface. The real power of the Merovingians may have lain in the esoteric practices whispered about in secret chambers, passed down through generations, and deliberately hidden from the prying eyes of the church and the chroniclers who sought to simplify or sanitize their reign. Some accounts suggest that the Merovingians were keepers of a knowledge older than Christendom itself. They may have inherited ancient wisdom, perhaps rooted in pre-Roman Gaul, Celtic Druidism, or even older Mediterranean mystery traditions. Rituals, sacred ceremonies, and esoteric teachings were reportedly intertwined with their governance, giving their reign a dimension that extended beyond politics and into the spiritual. Their kingship was not just a position of power. It was a spiritual office, a role that required the safeguarding of hidden knowledge that could influence the very destiny of the kingdom. Numerous scholars and occult researchers have noted that certain Merovingian kings were associated with practices that today would be considered mystical or even arcane. There are hints of ceremonial rites conducted at secret locations, perhaps in remote forests, secluded rivers, or hidden chambers beneath their palaces. These ceremonies may have involved elements of astrology, numerology, and sacred geometry, each symbolically reinforcing the divine right of the king and strengthening the lineage's connection to forces beyond ordinary comprehension. The precise nature of these practices is unknown, but the consistency of historical hints suggests that they were integral to Merovingian rule. The symbolism embedded in their artifacts further supports the notion of esoteric knowledge. Coins, jewelry, and illuminated manuscripts sometimes carry unusual motifs, including geometric patterns, celestial symbols, and stylized animal imagery. To the untrained eye, these might appear decorative, but to an initiate, they could represent coded knowledge, secret instructions, or a mystical language meant to guide the initiated. Some researchers believe that these objects acted as mnemonic devices, helping the Merovingian elite recall sacred texts or hidden rituals that were never written openly for fear of persecution or misunderstanding. Moreover, the Merovingians may have been practitioners of a form of spiritual alchemy, not in the sense of turning lead into gold, but transforming the self and the bloodline into something spiritually potent. This notion of sacred blood is a recurring theme in alternative historical research. The king's blood, the very essence of their lineage, was believed to carry qualities beyond ordinary heredity. It was a vessel of wisdom, vitality, and perhaps even divine favor. This concept aligns with the legends of the Holy Grail, often theorized not as a physical chalice, but as a symbolic representation of a sacred, life-giving bloodline, a line the Merovingians were said to embody. It is also believed that the Merovingians carefully guarded this knowledge, embedding it into secret societies and trusted circles, perhaps even influencing the rise of later esoteric orders in Europe. These societies may have functioned as custodians, keeping the rituals alive across generations while simultaneously concealing them from mainstream scrutiny. The very act of hiding such wisdom added to its mystique, turning every chronicler's omission into a clue for those seeking the truth centuries later. Historians note the curious gaps in records, sudden disappearances of certain kings, and cryptic references to sacred rites as potential evidence that something far deeper was taking place behind closed doors. Yet, despite the secrecy, echoes of these practices persisted in folklore and myth. Tales of kings who could heal with a touch, interpret dreams with uncanny accuracy, or communicate with unseen forces may have been grounded in actual Merovingian ceremonial knowledge. Even the Church, often positioned as a censor of pagan or mystical traditions, seems to have acknowledged, in subtle ways, that the Merovingian kings wielded a type of power that could not be fully explained or subdued. Their combination of political authority and esoteric insight made them a formidable force in both worldly and spiritual realms. Modern researchers continue to explore these connections, examining manuscripts, artifacts, and obscure references in historical chronicles that hint at a sophisticated, hidden layer to Merovingian rule. The idea of kings as custodians of secret knowledge challenges our conventional understanding of medieval Europe, suggesting that beneath the surface of conquest, alliances, and governance lay a rich tapestry of ritual, symbolism, and mysticism. The more one investigates, the more it becomes clear that the Merovingians' true power may not have been in the armies they commanded or the lands they ruled, but in the wisdom and esoteric practices that flowed silently through their bloodline, preserved in secret for those able to decipher the hidden code. These practices were never mere superstition. They represented a worldview in which the natural, spiritual, and cosmic realms were interconnected, and where the king served as a bridge between the mortal and the divine. In this sense, the Merovingians were not just rulers. They were the living embodiment of a secret tradition, a lineage tasked with carrying forward knowledge that could alter the understanding of humanity itself. And while history may have buried the details, the traces of this esoteric mastery remain, waiting for those willing to see beyond the surface and step into the hidden world of the long-haired kings. The Merovingian secrets were not confined to their own courts or bloodlines. Whispers of their influence seemed to stretch across centuries, intertwining with one of history's most enigmatic orders, the Knights Templar. This connection has fascinated researchers and conspiracy theorists alike, as tantalizing hints suggest that the Templars were not only warriors and bankers, but also custodians of knowledge that had survived the fall of the Merovingian dynasty. Could it be that the Merovingians, faced with political suppression by the Carolingians and the Church, entrusted their hidden wisdom to a secretive military order that spanned the known world? The theory is compelling, and the evidence, though fragmented, is difficult to dismiss entirely. The Templars, officially founded in 1119, are often remembered for their martial prowess, their wealth, and their eventual dramatic downfall. Yet, beyond the surface of history, their actions hint at a deeper purpose. Some documents and chroniclers suggest that the Templars were involved in safeguarding relics, sacred texts, and secret knowledge. Among these items may have been remnants of the Merovingian bloodlines' esoteric practices, encoded manuscripts, or symbols of authority long considered lost to history. It is striking that many of the Templars' rituals and symbols, ranging from cryptic crosses to the enigmatic use of numbers and geometry, bear a curious resemblance to the types of mysticism associated with the Merovingians. The patterns are subtle, almost deliberately obscured, as if meant for only the initiated to recognize. One of the most tantalizing aspects of this connection is the idea of the Holy Grail as a bloodline rather than a physical object. Alternative historians suggest that the Merovingians may have been the original guardians of this sacred lineage, and when their power waned, the Templars took up the mantle. In this theory, the Templars were not merely soldiers or protectors of Christian relics. They were secret keepers of a living treasure, the encoded wisdom, symbols, and possibly even descendants of the Merovingian kings. Every crusade, every fortress built in remote lands, could have been motivated not only by religious zeal or political ambition, but by the need to protect and conceal this extraordinary knowledge. Archaeological sites and architectural clues have fueled this speculation further. Some Templar commanderies and churches are constructed with unusual alignments, geometric patterns, and hidden chambers that defy conventional explanation. Scholars have noted that these sites often incorporate symbols reminiscent of Merovingian iconography, triangles, stars, and stylized animals, that may act as markers for secret teachings or repositories of knowledge. It is as though the Templars were leaving a breadcrumb trail, a coded map for those who could decipher their hidden language, linking them to a lineage that was supposedly erased from history. Manuscripts that survived the Templar purge in the early 14th century hint at even more. Although most were destroyed or hidden, a few cryptic texts survived, mentioning sacred bloodlines, guardianship, and secret treasures buried from the eyes of the world. These writings often refer to a power older than kingdoms, a knowledge so potent that it could challenge the established order. Within these pages, some researchers claim to find echoes of Merovingian ritual practices, obscure genealogical references, and even prophecies concerning the survival of the bloodline. The Templars, it seems, may have acted as the ultimate protectors of a secret too dangerous or profound for ordinary rulers or the church to control. Some historians argue that this protection extended beyond Europe. The Templars' extensive networks, stretching from the Holy Land to the British Isles, from France to the Mediterranean, may have served to disperse and conceal Merovingian relics and knowledge. Certain sacred sites, now forgotten or buried beneath centuries of history, could have been used as safe houses or spiritual repositories. Even today, cryptic maps, coded manuscripts, and ancient architecture suggest that a hidden layer of history lies beneath the familiar narrative, a hidden infrastructure built to shield a secret from the eyes of the world for centuries. What makes this connection all the more compelling is the timing of events. The decline of the Merovingians, the rise of the Carolingians, and a later establishment of the Templars align suspiciously with the movement and concealment of powerful relics and secret knowledge. Every transition of power seems to coincide with a calculated effort to preserve what could not be publicly acknowledged. The pattern suggests a lineage of guardianship, from Merovingian kings through clandestine orders and eventually to the Templars. It is a chain of secrecy that, if true, reframes European history in a way mainstream textbooks cannot admit. Yet, as with all things involving secrecy and power, the line between fact and speculation is blurred. Critics argue that the Merovingian-Templar connection is merely the stuff of legend, pieced together from coincidental symbols and tenuous evidence. However, the sheer persistence of these links across centuries, locations, and artifacts invites a deeper look. The coded symbols, the strange architectural designs, the cryptic manuscripts, they all suggest that something extraordinary was being hidden. Whether that something was a physical relic, a bloodline, or a body of esoteric knowledge, it was clearly important enough to be protected at immense cost. Some modern authors have even suggested that the Templars' mysterious disappearance in 1307 and the subsequent rumor of secret treasures may have been linked to the safeguarding of Merovingian secrets. Instead of annihilation, they may have gone underground, continuing their work in secrecy. Over time, legends of hidden vaults, sacred bloodlines, and cryptic maps have fused, creating a rich tapestry of myth and mystery. Yet beneath the myth, there could be a kernel of truth, a centuries-old network dedicated to preserving the secrets of a dynasty that mainstream history wanted forgotten. The idea that the Merovingians' mystical knowledge survived through the Templars cast the medieval world in a radically different light. Kings and knights were not merely rulers or warriors. They were custodians of something much greater, guardians of a truth that challenged conventional power structures. It was a world where spiritual authority and temporal power intertwined, where secret wisdom was more valuable than armies, and where the fall of a dynasty did not necessarily mean the end of its influence. Instead, it could have marked the beginning of a shadowed era, one in which hidden hands guided the currents of history, unseen yet profoundly influential. Ultimately, the Merovingian-Templar connection raises more questions than answers, but those questions are precisely what keep researchers, historians, and mystery enthusiasts returning to the story. Who truly controlled the knowledge of the long-haired kings? What relics or texts survive, hidden in plain sight or buried deep underground? And most tantalizingly, how much of our understanding of European history has been shaped not by what is recorded, but by what has been deliberately concealed? The Templars may have been more than crusaders. They could have been the bridge between a lost dynasty and the modern fascination with sacred bloodlines, secret treasures, and the enduring mystery of the Grail. Across centuries, the Merovingians and their supposed allies, like the Knights Templar, left traces of their hidden knowledge in ways that could endure long after the fall of kings and orders. These traces are found in maps, manuscripts, and cryptic artifacts, subtle signposts that hint at lost treasures, secret knowledge, or sacred sites connected to the bloodline. At first glance, these items might seem mundane or decorative, but closer inspection suggests a carefully orchestrated system of clues designed for those who knew how to interpret them. It is as if the Merovingians and their custodians built a secret layer of reality over Europe, one that remains partially visible to the initiated and nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Ancient maps provide one of the most tantalizing glimpses into this hidden world. While medieval cartography is often dismissed as inaccurate or symbolic, some maps appear to contain deliberate markers that correspond to sacred sites, lost Merovingian estates, or locations tied to the Grail legend. Rivers, forests, and mountain ranges may be exaggerated or misplaced not due to error, but to encode secret information. In some cases, alignments between landmarks suggest a celestial or geometric system, a kind of coded language linking the earth to the heavens. For researchers, these maps are more than historical documents. They are potential guides to a forgotten network of sacred geography, where every curve, symbol, and hidden notation might reveal a secret long buried. Manuscripts, too, play a crucial role in this mystery. Illuminated texts from the early medieval period often feature unusual symbols, cryptic marginalia, and patterns that resist conventional interpretation. Some historians suggest that these markings are not mere decoration, but contain encoded knowledge. Certain letters, numbers, and images may correspond to genealogical lines, ritual instructions, or mystical truths known only to a select few. Manuscripts connected to the Templars, monastic scribes, or even hidden Merovingian scribes themselves sometimes contain references to lost relics or bloodline secrets that mainstream historians have overlooked or dismissed. The survival of these texts is itself remarkable, considering the systematic destruction of esoteric documents over the centuries by both religious and political authorities. Artifacts provide yet another layer of intrigue. Small objects, coins, seals, jewelry, and ceremonial items often feature symbols that recur in Merovingian and Templar contexts. Geometric patterns, intertwined animals, and celestial symbols appear with a consistency that seems unlikely to be coincidental. Some researchers argue that these objects were more than symbols. They were tools, carrying encoded knowledge, acting as keys to sacred sites, or even serving as talismans protecting the bloodline's spiritual power. In some cases, the very design of an artifact may encode numbers or directions pointing to secret locations, blending artistry with cryptography in a way that challenges modern understanding. The interplay between these maps, manuscripts, and artifacts suggests a sophisticated system of information preservation. It is almost as if the Merovingians anticipated the fall of their dynasty and carefully created a hidden infrastructure to preserve their secrets. Cryptic signs on a map could correspond to a manuscript's notation, which in turn relates to the design of a ceremonial object. For the untrained eye, these are curious coincidences. For the initiated, they form a coherent network of guidance and protection. Such a system implies not only advanced knowledge, but also meticulous planning, indicating that the Merovingians understood the long-term value of secrecy and encoded information. Some sites that survive to this day are particularly compelling. Ancient abbeys, castles, and temples often contain hidden chambers, unusual architectural alignments, or inscriptions that resist explanation. In certain cases, the orientation of these buildings corresponds to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or specific star alignments, suggesting a link between earthly power and cosmic forces. Combined with artifacts and manuscripts, these sites create a layered puzzle, as though the Merovingians and their successors intended future generations to uncover the truth gradually, one piece at a time. Modern explorers have documented secret passages, concealed compartments, and even cryptic engravings in stone that hint at long-forgotten rituals or hidden treasures. This hidden network is also tied to the legends of the Grail. Many researchers argue that these maps and manuscripts point not to a single chalice, but to a concept, a sacred bloodline, a repository of wisdom, or a network of hidden knowledge. Certain encoded locations may have served as storage for physical relics, while others functioned as sites for ritual or meditation, places where the bloodline's esoteric practices could be maintained in secrecy. The convergence of celestial alignments, symbolic architecture, and encoded text suggests that the Merovingians approached sacred geography as both a practical and mystical system, merging politics, spirituality, and secrecy into a coherent whole. The survival of these clues, despite centuries of upheaval, destruction, and suppression, is extraordinary. Fires, invasions, and religious purges claimed countless texts and artifacts, yet fragments remain, often hidden in monasteries, private collections, or even plain sight, disguised as mundane objects. The deliberate obscurity of these traces reinforces the notion that the Merovingians and their successors understood the fragility of their knowledge. By dispersing it across multiple media, maps, manuscripts, and artifacts, they created redundancy, ensuring that even if some pieces were lost, others could guide future seekers. Even today, modern researchers, treasure hunters, and esoteric historians continue to piece together these fragments. They analyze ancient symbols, reconstruct maps using celestial and geographic coordinates, and cross-reference manuscripts with genealogical records. Each discovery sparks new theories, further deepening the mystery. Some argue that we may never fully understand the intentions of the Merovingians, that their encoded knowledge was meant to remain partially hidden, revealing itself only to those with the patience, insight, and dedication to interpret it correctly. Yet the very act of piecing together these clues offers a glimpse into a world where kings wielded power not only through armies and politics, but through the meticulous preservation of secret wisdom. In the end, the maps, manuscripts, and hidden clues left behind by the Merovingians create a tantalizing vision of a Europe layered with invisible meaning. The familiar landscapes of France, Germany, and neighboring regions may conceal secrets under forests, rivers, and hills, markers of a sophisticated system of sacred knowledge. Every symbol, every line on a map, every marginal note could be a key, waiting to be deciphered. It is a reminder that history is often written in shadows, that behind the visible record lies a network of encoded truths, and that the Merovingians' legacy may be far richer and more complex than any textbook could reveal. The pursuit of these hidden clues continues to inspire intrigue, inviting modern minds to walk the same paths of discovery that the initiates of the past may have followed. Every manuscript leaf turned, every artifact studied, and every site explored adds another piece to the grand puzzle. A puzzle that, when seen as a whole, reveals the true scope of a dynasty that sought to merge temporal rule with spiritual mastery, leaving behind a trail that stretches across the centuries, whispering of a secret still waiting to be fully uncovered. Throughout their history, the Merovingians were surrounded not only by political intrigue and secret rituals, but also by prophecies, cryptic predictions that seemed to foretell the destiny of kings, dynasties, and the sacred knowledge they guarded. These prophecies, recorded in obscure manuscripts or passed down orally through trusted advisors, often blurred the line between myth and history, leaving historians and modern researchers grappling with their meaning. To those within the Merovingian court, these visions were more than fanciful tales. They were warnings, guides, and perhaps even instructions for safeguarding the lineage and the esoteric secrets it carried. Some of the earliest prophecies attributed to the Merovingians are entwined with the figure of Merovec himself, the semi-legendary founder of the dynasty. Chroniclers speak of a king whose bloodline would endure challenges beyond comprehension, whose descendants would carry a hidden power, and whose line might be threatened but never fully extinguished. These statements are cryptic, often couched in allegorical language that mixes references to stars, animals, and rivers with abstract notions of kingship and spiritual authority. Yet, the persistence of these prophecies across generations suggests that they were taken seriously by those who understood their potential consequences. One particularly striking aspect of the Merovingian prophecies is their emphasis on secrecy and survival. Many passages hint at hidden heirs, clandestine marriages, and bloodlines preserved in anonymity, emphasizing that the true continuation of power would not always be visible to the public eye. This aligns with later theories suggesting that the Templars or other secretive custodians played a role in preserving Merovingian knowledge and lineage. The prophecies seem almost self-fulfilling. By warning of threats and emphasizing concealment, they provided a framework for survival, instructing future generations to protect what could not be openly displayed. Some prophecies also appear to intersect with the symbolism of the Holy Grail. Rather than a literal cup, the Grail may have represented the continuity of the sacred bloodline, the living embodiment of the knowledge and power the Merovingians possessed. Prophecies hint at a line of kings whose descendants would safeguard wisdom, treasures, or spiritual authority through the centuries. In this sense, the Grail was less a physical object and more a concept, a codified symbol representing the preservation of esoteric knowledge through blood, ritual, and secrecy. The subtlety of these prophecies allowed them to survive, even under scrutiny, their true meaning shielded from those who might misuse or suppress them. Several medieval manuscripts provide tantalizing evidence of these predictions. Marginal notes, obscure annotations, and coded symbols suggest that the prophecies were often deliberately obscured, written in a manner that could only be understood by those initiated into the mysteries of the Merovingian court. Some historians have pointed out that certain manuscripts combine genealogical charts, mystical symbols, and poetic language, forming a multi-layered text where each element reinforces the other. These are not simple predictions. They are complex instructions, a guidebook for safeguarding sacred knowledge while navigating the treacherous currents of political power. Interestingly, some of the prophecies also appear to extend beyond the immediate survival of the dynasty, hinting at long-term influence and the shaping of European history. References to kings hidden among men or wisdom flowing in silence could suggest that Merovingian bloodlines continued to exert influence long after the dynasty officially fell. Certain scholars argue that these veiled hints provide a framework for understanding later secret societies, hidden traditions, and the Templars' role as custodians of sacred knowledge. In other words, the prophecies were not only about survival, but about the persistence of influence, extending the dynasty's reach far into a future shaped by secrecy and subtlety. The prophetic narratives also include cryptic warnings about enemies, betrayals, and periods of great upheaval. These passages often align with known historical events, such as the rise of the Carolingians, the suppression of dissenting religious practices, and the eventual persecution of secretive orders like the Templars. While some skeptics dismiss these as coincidence or post hoc interpretation, the precision of certain predictions, especially those related to succession crises and hidden heirs, has intrigued generations of historians and alternative researchers alike. It is as if the Merovingians understood that their power was fragile in the political realm, but indestructible in the spiritual or esoteric domain. Prophecies also extend to the guardianship of sacred knowledge, emphasizing the role of secret custodians. By warning of threats, persecution, or the risk of loss, the texts implicitly instructed future generations on how to preserve and transmit their wisdom. Whether through secret orders, hidden manuscripts, or encoded symbolism in architecture and artifacts, these instructions form a subtle but persistent pattern throughout European history. It is a framework of continuity that explains how certain esoteric traditions survived despite centuries of suppression, and how the legend of the Merovingians continues to resonate in modern fascination with secret societies and hidden bloodlines. For modern audiences, these prophecies create a sense of suspense and mystery, linking the distant past to the present. They invite us to question what has been lost, what survives, and what remains hidden beneath the surface of accepted history. The interplay between prophecy, secrecy, and bloodline underscores the unique character of the Merovingians, a dynasty whose power was as much about knowledge and preservation as it was about crowns and territory. By studying these predictions, we gain insight into a worldview where the future could be guided by coded wisdom, where kingship was inseparable from spiritual duty, and where the destiny of a bloodline could hinge on secrecy, foresight, and careful planning. Ultimately, the Merovingian prophecies remind us that history is layered. The visible narrative, chronicles of battles, political treaties, and royal succession, represents only the surface. Beneath it lies a network of warnings, instructions, and symbolic guidance, written for those who could read between the lines. These prophecies were a bridge between the tangible world of kings and kingdoms and the intangible realm of sacred knowledge, ensuring that even in apparent defeat, the Merovingians' influence would endure. They left a message not merely for their contemporaries, but for generations to come. That power, when combined with secrecy and spiritual insight, is never fully lost. The story of the Merovingians, as captivating as it is also one marked by deliberate erasure. Over centuries, a systematic effort appears to have reshaped their history, silencing voices, altering records, and reframing their legacy to suit the ambitions of those in power. Mainstream chronicles present the Merovingians as early Frankish kings whose influence faded with the rise of the Carolingians. But a closer examination of historical anomalies, gaps, and cryptic references suggests a far more complex narrative. The erasure was not accidental. It seems to have been a careful and deliberate rewriting, designed to suppress knowledge that threatened the prevailing order, both politically and spiritually. One of the most striking indicators of this oppression is the sudden and dramatic shift in royal succession. The Merovingians ruled for centuries, yet when the Carolingians rose to power, the transition was presented in historical texts as a simple replacement of one dynasty by another. Yet contemporary accounts, fragmented and sometimes contradictory, hint at intrigue, conspiracies, and the systematic removal of rivals. Key Merovingian figures vanish from the records without explanation, while obscure references to hidden heirs persist. These gaps raise questions. Were these kings eliminated politically, or were they allowed to survive in secrecy, their influence redirected through covert channels? The possibility that the dynasty continued clandestinely undermines the neat narrative presented in textbooks and history classes. Church involvement also played a crucial role in shaping the official story. The early medieval period was marked by the consolidation of religious authority, and the Church had both motive and means to suppress knowledge that conflicted with its teachings. The Merovingians, with their esoteric practices and sacred bloodline, represented a challenge to the centralized religious authority that the Carolingians and the Church were eager to establish. Rituals, symbols, and even genealogical records could be interpreted as threats, particularly if they suggested an alternative form of spiritual legitimacy. By controlling the narrative, by censoring manuscripts, altering genealogies, and influencing chroniclers, the Church ensured that the Merovingians' deeper, mystical influence would be obscured for centuries. Physical evidence of suppression can also be found in architecture, art, and artifacts. Many Merovingian sites were deliberately repurposed, destroyed, or altered by subsequent rulers, erasing symbols that conveyed power or sacred knowledge. Coins, seals, and other artifacts bearing cryptic designs were melted down, repurposed, or hidden, effectively removing visible proof of the dynasty's spiritual and temporal authority. Even manuscripts were subject to censorship or destruction, especially during periods of political consolidation or religious reform. The very act of suppression became a tool for controlling memory, shaping perception, and ensuring that the story of the Merovingians would fit the version favored by those in power. Despite these efforts, fragments of the truth survived. Hidden texts, obscure annotations, and oral traditions carried pieces of the story forward. Marginalia in manuscripts, cryptic references in chronicles, and architectural anomalies hint at a narrative deliberately obscured but never entirely erased. Modern researchers have painstakingly pieced together these fragments, uncovering tantalizing hints of the dynasty's enduring influence. Every surviving manuscript or artifact acts as a whisper from the past, suggesting a continuity that official histories have tried to erase. It is in these fragments that the Merovingians' hidden legacy becomes visible, a testament to resilience in the face of deliberate suppression. Suppression also extended to the interpretation of esoteric knowledge. Rituals, symbolic practices, and sacred sites were deliberately recast as superstition or pagan relics, stripped of their original meaning. Practices once integral to royal authority were labeled as heretical or irrelevant, ensuring that the population would forget the spiritual power these kings once wielded. Even the symbolism embedded in architecture and artifacts was reinterpreted or ignored, leaving only hints for those able to recognize patterns and decode meaning. This transformation of understanding served to isolate the esoteric traditions, restricting their interpretation to a select few while presenting the rest as ordinary history. The pattern of suppression was not only about erasing the past, it was about shaping the future. By controlling the narrative, the church and ruling elites influenced perceptions of legitimacy, divine favor, and spiritual authority. The Merovingians, with their sacred bloodline and secret practices, represented a model of power that could challenge the centralized control of knowledge and belief. Erasing or distorting their story ensured that the mechanisms of power, both temporal and spiritual, remained firmly in the hands of those who controlled the official record. In this sense, the suppression of the Merovingians is not merely a historical footnote. It is a study in the manipulation of memory, perception, and authority. Yet, the very act of suppression paradoxically reinforces the dynasty's mystique. The gaps, inconsistencies, and erased records themselves become clues, suggesting that what was hidden was not insignificant. Scholars and esoteric researchers view these silences as intentional, a coded signal that points to a story deliberately concealed. The more the official narrative erases, the more tantalizing the whispers of surviving bloodlines, hidden treasures, and secret knowledge become. In many ways, the suppression has ensured the survival of the Merovingian mythos, keeping it alive in the margins, in myths, in conspiracy theories, and in modern fascination with sacred bloodlines and hidden history. Modern investigators continue to follow the threads of these suppressed histories, piecing together genealogical anomalies, symbolic motifs, and cryptic manuscripts. They study sites that were altered, repurposed, or abandoned, seeking traces of ritual or significance overlooked by conventional historians. Every discovery, whether a manuscript hidden in a monastery, a strange alignment in an old chapel, or an artifact buried in the earth, adds weight to the argument that the Merovingians' legacy was deliberately obscured rather than lost. It is a reminder that history is often written by those in power, but the truth can persist in shadows, waiting for those willing to see it. The deliberate erasure of the Merovingians also raises broader questions about historical memory. How many other dynasties, traditions, or lines of knowledge were similarly suppressed? How much of what we accept as fact has been shaped by deliberate omission? In exploring these questions, the story of the Merovingians becomes more than a tale of a single dynasty. It becomes a lens through which to examine the mechanisms of power, secrecy, and historical control. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and question the narratives handed down through generations. In the end, the suppression of the Merovingians underscores a recurring theme, that power and knowledge are inseparable. The dynasty's political defeat did not erase the influence of their bloodline, their rituals, or their hidden wisdom. Instead, it was redirected, protected, and concealed, waiting for the curious, the patient, and the perceptive to uncover the fragments scattered across time. Every erased record, every altered artifact, and every hidden manuscript serves as both a warning and an invitation. A warning of the power that secrecy can protect, and an invitation to explore the shadows where history and mystery intertwine. In the modern era, the whispers of the Merovingians' hidden legacy have not been forgotten. Across Europe and beyond, Researchers, historians, and treasure hunters have dedicated their lives to tracing the remnants of a dynasty that history seemed eager to erase. These modern explorers are drawn not only by the allure of wealth or relics, but by the possibility of uncovering knowledge that has been deliberately concealed for centuries. A secret network of bloodlines, rituals, and artifacts that could redefine our understanding of European history. Their quest blends meticulous scholarship with the thrill of adventure, creating a living bridge between past and present. These investigators often approach the story from multiple angles. Some focus on genealogy, painstakingly tracing family lines through obscure records, parish registers, and private archives. They seek to identify potential descendants of the Merovingian bloodline, exploring claims that the sacred lineage may have survived in secrecy, quietly influencing history through the centuries. Others are drawn to esoteric texts, analyzing manuscripts filled with cryptic symbols, coded messages, and marginalia that hint at hidden knowledge. By cross-referencing these writings with historical events, architectural clues, and local legends, researchers attempt to reconstruct a hidden narrative of power and preservation. Treasure hunters, meanwhile, often follow the physical trail left behind. Ancient maps, secret locations, and architectural anomalies that may mark sites of buried relics or ceremonial importance. Some explore abandoned abbeys, forested ruins, or remote chapels, searching for hidden chambers, crypts, or symbols carved in a stone that have survived the centuries. These expeditions are not without risk. Many of these sites are dangerous, structurally unstable, or located in isolated regions. Yet the possibility of uncovering a tangible link to a lost dynasty, or even a relic of the Grail legend, drives them forward. Each discovery, no matter how small, fuels the excitement of piecing together a centuries-old puzzle. A unique challenge modern researchers face is the need to separate fact from fiction. Over the years, myths, conspiracy theories, and speculative histories have intertwined with the story of the Merovingians, creating a complex web that must be carefully untangled. Some claims are sensationalized, others unverifiable, and yet within these tales lie kernels of truth. Scholars often treat folklore, coded manuscripts, and oral traditions as potential clues rather than definitive evidence, analyzing patterns and consistencies that may point toward hidden knowledge. In this way, the investigation becomes a delicate dance between skepticism and imagination, requiring both rigorous methodology and an openness to possibilities that conventional history cannot easily explain. Technology has added a new dimension to these explorations. Archaeologists and researchers now use ground-penetrating radar, 3D mapping, and digital reconstruction to examine sites that were previously inaccessible or obscured. Manuscripts can be digitally enhanced to reveal faded ink, hidden symbols, or annotations that were invisible to the naked eye. Genealogical research has also been transformed by DNA analysis, offering potential verification of bloodline claims and providing modern tools to trace the living descendants of ancient dynasties. Each technological advance increases the potential to uncover evidence long thought lost, creating new opportunities to explore the Merovingians' enduring influence. These modern investigations often reveal fascinating intersections of history, mysticism, and conspiracy. For example, cryptic architectural features in old churches or Templar commanderies may correspond with manuscript instructions, suggesting that sacred knowledge was encoded in the very landscape. Ancient maps may point to hidden locations, now corroborated by satellite imagery or ground surveys. In some cases, folklore passed down through generations retains hints of these secrets, stories of kings who vanished, treasures hidden in plain sight, or sacred rituals performed in secrecy. The challenge lies in decoding these fragments, discerning their true significance, and weaving them into a coherent narrative that honors both the evidence and the mystery. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of modern research is the sense of continuity it creates. Those who study the Merovingians today are, in a sense, following in the footsteps of the original custodians of their knowledge. They are connecting with a chain of secrecy and preservation that may stretch back over a millennium, piecing together what has been deliberately scattered across time. Each manuscript examined, each ruin explored, and each family tree traced brings the past in a sharper focus, revealing the persistence of influence that official histories have sought to conceal. It is a pursuit that blends scholarship with devotion, investigation with discovery, and fact with the thrill of the unknown. At the same time, these modern explorers are acutely aware of the stakes. They know that the knowledge they seek is powerful, not merely in a material sense, but spiritually and historically. Discovering an artifact, uncovering a hidden manuscript, or confirming a bloodline could reshape our understanding of history, challenge established narratives, and illuminate practices and traditions deliberately hidden for centuries. The work is both exhilarating and daunting, requiring patience, discernment, and a willingness to embrace ambiguity. Each step forward is measured, every clue scrutinized, and no discovery is taken at face value without careful corroboration. For audiences and enthusiasts, the work of modern investigators adds a dynamic layer to the Merovingian story. It demonstrates that the mystery is not confined to the past. It lives on in the present, actively shaping how we understand history, secrecy, and power. The efforts of these researchers underscore the idea that history is not static, that hidden truths may survive in shadows, and that the pursuit of knowledge often requires daring, intuition, and a deep connection to the mysteries of the past. It is a reminder that the Merovingians' legacy is not just a story to be read. It is a puzzle to be engaged with, a trail to follow, and a mystery that continues to inspire those willing to look beyond the surface. Ultimately, the work of modern mystery hunters and scholars highlights the enduring fascination of the Merovingians. They are not simply a footnote in medieval history. They're a symbol of hidden power, sacred knowledge, and the human desire to preserve what is precious and profound. By tracing their traces, decoding their secrets, and exploring the remnants of their world, these modern explorers keep the story alive. They remind us that even in a world dominated by recorded history and digital archives, mysteries remain, waiting for those with patience, vision, and courage to uncover them. In doing so, they bridge the gap between past and present, reality and legend, and the known and the hidden, inviting us all to consider what lies beneath the surface of the world we think we understand. After centuries of secrecy, suppression, and whispers in the shadows, we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the hidden grail of the Merovingians. For generations, scholars, mystics, and treasure hunters have sought to uncover the ultimate secret of this long-forgotten dynasty. But unlike the tales of knights questing for a physical chalice, the Grail in this context is far more elusive, far more profound. It is not merely a relic to be held, but a symbol of sacred lineage, encoded knowledge, and spiritual authority preserved through centuries of deliberate concealment. In tracing the threads of history, prophecy, and esoteric practice, the true nature of the Merovingian Grail begins to emerge, revealing a tapestry of mystery and revelation that transcends conventional understanding. The journey toward this revelation begins with the bloodline itself. The Merovingians were believed to carry a sacred essence, a form of divine or mystical inheritance embedded in their very being. Their long hair, which so fascinated chroniclers, was more than a symbol of status. It was said to signify a living connection to this sacred power. Rituals performed by these kings were designed to harness, protect, and transmit the potency of the bloodline, linking them to cosmic or spiritual forces beyond the perception of ordinary humans. The Grail, in this sense, was not a cup but a living symbol. The blood, knowledge, and sacred rites that flowed through generations, guiding rulers and custodians alike. Prophecies scattered throughout medieval manuscripts hint at the importance of this sacred line. Some speak cryptically of a line of kings hidden among men, suggesting that even after the apparent fall of the Merovingians, their influence continued clandestinely. The Templars, many believe, were entrusted with safeguarding this lineage and the associated wisdom. They traveled across continents, built fortified commanderies, and meticulously recorded symbols, rituals, and genealogical details, all to protect the Grail from those who would misuse it. These orders became the living bridge between the fallen dynasty and future generations, ensuring that the essence of the Merovingian legacy would survive in the shadows. The artifacts, maps, and manuscripts explored by modern researchers form a pattern that strengthens this theory. Certain locations in Europe, remote abbeys, hidden crypts, and isolated castles, appear to have been deliberately aligned with celestial events or sacred geometry, suggesting a symbolic geography designed to protect or reveal the Grail at the right moment. Marginalia in manuscripts, coded inscriptions, and geometric motifs all point to a sophisticated system of knowledge preservation. In some cases, even mundane objects, coins, jewelry, or ceremonial tools may have functioned as keys, encoding directions, genealogical data, or ritual instructions meant only for those initiated into the secret. These pieces, when assembled, form a network of guidance and concealment that has survived centuries of suppression. At the same time, the notion of the Grail as a bloodline reframes our understanding of historical events. The political upheavals of the Carolingian takeover, the rise and fall of noble families, and the persecution of secretive orders can be seen not merely as power struggles, but as deliberate attempts to control or obscure access to sacred knowledge. Those in power understood that the Merovingians possessed something more than temporal authority. They held the key to a continuity of wisdom and spiritual potency. By suppressing their history, altering records, and erasing rituals, they sought to break the chain of knowledge and prevent its influence from shaping the future. Yet the persistence of symbols, prophecies, and hidden lineages suggests that the plan was never entirely successful. The Templars' disappearance in the early 14th century adds another layer of intrigue. Some theorists propose that their dramatic downfall was not a simple political purge, but a carefully orchestrated event to protect the Grail from falling into the wrong hands. The order may have gone underground, dispersing relics, texts, and encoded instructions across Europe, ensuring that the knowledge could survive without a centralized custodianship. This aligns with the continued fascination in modern times with mysterious tunnels, lost treasure hoards, and cryptic inscriptions, all hinting at a dispersed but protected network of sacred knowledge connected to the Merovingians. Modern discoveries have added tantalizing hints to this narrative. Genealogical research, supported in some cases by DNA analysis, suggests the possibility of surviving Merovingian descendants. These individuals, whether aware or unaware of their lineage, represent a living connection to the Grail, the bloodline, and the esoteric wisdom it carries. Manuscripts rediscovered in monastic archives reveal coded prophecies and instructions for ritual preservation, while archaeological evidence points to hidden chambers and sites aligned with celestial phenomena. Every discovery reinforces the theory that the Grail is not a myth, but a carefully guarded legacy, interwoven with the spiritual, political, and mystical history of Europe. The esoteric rituals of the Merovingians further illuminate the nature of the Grail. Descriptions, though sparse, suggest ceremonies designed to enhance spiritual awareness, connect with cosmic cycles, and reinforce the potency of the bloodline. These rituals were secretive by design, accessible only to the initiates of the dynasty and those entrusted with its preservation. The combination of bloodline, ritual, and sacred geometry creates a framework where the Grail operates not as a static object, but as a dynamic, living system, one that blends the physical, spiritual, and temporal realms into a coherent whole. The culmination of these threads, the bloodline, the Templar custodianship, the artifacts, the maps, and the prophecies, paint a picture of a dynasty that transcends ordinary historical narrative. The Merovingians did not vanish. They transformed, embedding their essence in symbols, rituals, and networks of knowledge that endured through centuries of deliberate suppression. The Grail, therefore, is not merely a story of medieval romance or a lost chalice. It is a complex and enduring legacy of sacred lineage, encoded wisdom, and the careful stewardship of power. The king's influence persists in hidden ways, challenging conventional understandings of history and inviting modern seekers to uncover the truth patiently, piece by piece. Even now, the pursuit of the Grail continues to inspire curiosity, exploration, and scholarship. Every manuscript leaf, every artifact, every coded symbol offers a potential window into the hidden world of the Merovingians. For those willing to study the subtle signals left behind, the Grail reveals itself not in a single dramatic moment, but through an intricate web of connections, a narrative that spans centuries and crosses boundaries of religion, politics, and spirituality. This climax, therefore, is not a single revelation, but a convergence. The realization that the Grail represents the living, enduring essence of a dynasty whose power, knowledge, and mystery continue to ripple through history. The grandeur of the revelation lies in its subtlety. Unlike a traditional treasure, the Grail is an idea, a legacy, a code embedded in blood, ritual, and memory. It teaches that influence and knowledge cannot be fully destroyed, only concealed. It demonstrates that even the apparent fall of a dynasty does not erase its essence, and that those who understand the symbols and clues can reconnect with a lineage of sacred wisdom. The Hidden Grail, in this sense, is as much a call to understanding as it is a story of discovery, an invitation to explore the unseen, to question the official narrative, and to recognize the enduring power of those who walk in the shadows of history. Ultimately, the climactic revelation of the Hidden Grail is both a resolution and a new beginning. It ties together centuries of prophecy, suppression, and hidden knowledge while leaving room for further exploration. It suggests that the Merovingians' influence persists not just in artifacts or manuscripts, but in the very fabric of European history, spirituality, and mysticism. By understanding the Grail as a living symbol, embodying bloodline, ritual, and esoteric knowledge, we gain insight into a dynasty that defies simple categorization. The mystery is not merely solved. It is experienced, inviting those who follow the trail to step into a world where history and myth, the seen and unseen, intertwine in ways both profound and enduring. As we reach the conclusion of this journey through centuries of secrecy, prophecy, and hidden power, the story of the Merovingians stands revealed in all its layered complexity. The dynasty that history seemed eager to erase continues to cast long shadows across Europe, not merely as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of resilience, knowledge, and the enduring influence of those who walk in secrecy. What began as a tale of kings, conspiracies, and secret societies transforms into something more profound. A meditation on the nature of history itself, the fragility of memory, and the extraordinary lengths to which humans will go to preserve what they deem sacred. The Merovingians' legacy is not just embedded in manuscripts, maps, or artifacts. It lives on in the ideas, symbols, and rituals they cultivated. Their story challenges the way we understand authority, inheritance, and spiritual power. While the Carolingians may have succeeded politically, they could not erase the subtle network of knowledge, sacred bloodlines, and hidden wisdom that the Merovingians left behind. The dynasty's influence endured, protected by secret orders, encoded symbols, and carefully preserved rituals, demonstrating that true power is often invisible, maintained not through force alone, but through foresight, strategy, and the cultivation of sacred knowledge. Modern explorations, both academic and esoteric, serve as a testament to this enduring legacy. Researchers tracing genealogical threads, decoding manuscripts, or investigating hidden sites are participating in a centuries-old continuum of discovery and preservation. Each fragment uncovered, each symbol interpreted, is a reminder that history is not a static record, but a living tapestry, constantly woven and rewoven by those who observe, protect, and interpret it. The pursuit of understanding the Merovingians is not simply about uncovering a past dynasty. It is about engaging with the mystery, piecing together clues, and honoring the ingenuity of those who navigated secrecy with patience and precision. The Hidden Grail, now understood not as a physical object, but as a symbol of sacred lineage and esoteric wisdom, offers a powerful metaphor for this legacy. It represents continuity, the survival of knowledge and influence beyond political conquest. The Grail's secrecy, encoded in ritual, bloodline, and symbols, teaches that the most profound treasures are often intangible, safeguarded through subtlety and discretion. It is an emblem of the enduring impact of a dynasty that understood that history is shaped not only by visible power, but by the careful preservation of what is sacred, hidden, and essential. Reflecting on the centuries of suppression and erasure, one realizes that the Merovingian story is also a story of resistance. The dynasty's knowledge, rituals, and bloodline survived not because of armies or open rule, but because of a network of custodians who understood the value of secrecy. The Templars, monastic scribes, and hidden heirs all played roles in ensuring that the essence of the dynasty endured, often under extreme threat. This resilience is instructive. True influence is rarely overt. It survives in shadows, in whispers, and in the careful safeguarding of what the world may not yet be ready to receive. The cinematic journey we have undertaken, moving from the rise of the Merovingians to the suppression of their history and the eventual rediscovery of their secrets, illustrates a broader truth about human civilization. History is rarely straightforward. It is layered, contested, and shaped by those with the power to write it. What is celebrated and remembered often tells only half the story, while the suppressed, erased, or hidden fragments contain lessons, warnings, and revelations for those willing to look beyond the surface. The Merovingians exemplify this tension between visibility and concealment, demonstrating that what endures is often found not in monuments or chronicles alone, but in networks of knowledge preserved against the currents of time. Even as we conclude this exploration, the Merovingians continue to inspire curiosity, imagination, and inquiry. Their hidden grail, encoded symbols, and prophetic texts beckon modern seekers to engage with the mystery, encouraging us to question what we accept as history, to scrutinize what has been omitted, and to explore the spaces where myth and reality converge. In doing so, we are reminded that history is not a closed book, but a living narrative, waiting for those patient and perceptive enough to decipher its messages, interpret its signs, and appreciate the subtlety of its secrets. Ultimately, the Merovingian story leaves us with both closure and wonder. The dynasty's apparent disappearance does not signify an end, but a transformation, a shift from overt rule to hidden influence, from recorded deeds to encoded wisdom, from public power to spiritual legacy. Their journey teaches that influence is measured not only by conquest and visibility, but by the endurance of knowledge, the resilience of a bloodline, and the preservation of secrets capable of shaping thought and culture across centuries. It is a lesson in foresight, strategy, and the quiet potency of secrecy. As we step away from this exploration, the world the Merovingians inhabited seems both distant and immediate. Castles, abbeys, manuscripts, and ancient symbols become portals into a past where kings wielded authority over both realms of the visible and invisible. The echoes of their rituals, prophecies, and hidden wisdom ripple into our present, inviting reflection on the unseen forces that shape history, belief, and power. For those who look closely, the legacy of the Merovingians is not just a story of kings and conspiracies, but a living testament to the enduring capacity of knowledge, mystery, and human ingenuity to survive, even thrive, across the ages. The story closes not with an absolute answer, but with an invitation to explore, to question, and to seek what remains hidden. The Merovingians remind us that history is not always what it seems, that behind every narrative lies a web of secrets, custodians, and choices made to protect what was deemed sacred. And as long as curiosity persists, as long as seekers remain willing to trace the threads left in maps, manuscripts, and artifacts, the Merovingian legacy, like the Hidden Grail itself, will endure, whispering through time, guiding those who dare to follow the path into the shadows of history, where truth and mystery intertwine in ways that are both profound and eternal.